Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar Weekly discussion topic video. This week's topic is going to be me basically answering a bunch of kind of smaller questions submitted to me on Tumblr, Twitter, YouTube, wherever basically. Probably going to cover around 7 to 8 questions in this video, and then I'll just say it right now, and I'll say it again at the end. This is the same topic basically I'll be doing in next week's weekly Avatar video. So if you want to submit more questions beyond just these ones that I'm covering here today, definitely do them. I know I think most of the questions today come from Tumblr, so obviously people on YouTube didn't really get to see that this was the plan for next week's video. So definitely if you have a kind of shorter question that's not really worthy of like 20 minutes of discussion, let me know in the comments and I'll probably answer it in next week's discussion video. But yeah, let's get into it with the first question for this week. Yeah, interesting question, definitely, kind of like a perfect one suited to this type of format. Who thought Aang how to better bend his element, Katara, Toph, or Zuko? This is a very interesting question in that I think it's weird because obviously you have to factor in this idea that each avatar has like an element that they adapt to very quickly. You know, they already have basically their home element, and then they also have an element that they tend to struggle at. So with Aang, you know, obviously air and water are his good elements. Earth and fire were the ones he wasn't great at. Um, but really, Earth was the only one that really kind of he just flat out struggled to do for like personality kind of type reasons. While Fire was more like he actually adapted to it fairly quickly. He just didn't have the correct mindset at the time and kind of became afraid of it. So I think I can't quite say it was Katara who was his best teacher. He's Katara of the three, like Katara, Toph, Zuko is probably the best teacher, but um I'm not sure if I'd say that she was like Aang's ultimate best, you know, like in terms of how she taught him to bend the element most effectively, because Aang was basically a prodigy in terms of waterbending, and it was only his kind of slight lax attitude to being thought by Tapaku that made kind of Katara surpass him at the end. But obviously, she did teach him the more advanced stuff as the journey went on, and was a very important teacher to him. But because I think Aang adapted to water fairly easily, I can't quite say it was Katara. Toph, I think, is probably the least effective probably teacher of the three. Um, but she did help him to get through his kind of block with his most difficult element, which is definitely something worth noting. But I suppose again, in terms of Aang, she was probably the teacher who was the least effective for him in terms of like her style getting through to him when the style of Katara worked more effectively. I'd almost say Zuko was the best one because he kind of perfectly fit what Aang needed for firebending, in that he needed someone who understood what Aang was going through with fire in terms of how dangerous it was. Having obviously Zuko having just burned Toph, and Aang having burned Katara previously, and both of them kind of learning at the same time, but obviously Zuko being more experienced with fire, you know, talking about, you know, Aang being a talented kid as they went up the mountain and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty effective, and then I think in the later parts of the series you really see um, them sparring together, and that Zuko was actually a very good teacher for Aang. So maybe a surprise given this question, but I think Zuko potentially was Aang's best teacher in terms of Aang having a trouble with firebending, but Zuko also being the perfect person to teach him firebending. Whereas, you know, obviously there's a cool connection between Katara and Aang that's great, but I think a lot of people could have thought Aang waterbending because he adapted to it so quickly. So that's the first question, pretty interesting. Next one is, okay. This is a very interesting question. Obviously, I gave a kind of quick answer on Tumblr to this question already in text form, but this question is interesting. Obviously, like Sokka if he was in the position, the hypothetical situation of like being able to choose between Sookie and Yue, who would he choose and who's better for him and stuff like that. So uh, ultimately, I think he'd choose Sookie, and the reason I say this is because it comes down to, I suppose, the amount of time he spent with each of them. With Yue, it was, you know, on the verge of developing into a strong relationship. I don't think they were with each other long enough for it to properly be a really, really heavily developed relationship. In the sense of like, okay, they had the kiss, they kind of had like a date or two together during their time together, but for the most part, it was prior to them properly becoming a couple when Yue obviously turned into the moon. Um, and because of that, we didn't also get the most amazing character development for Yue as a character. So it's all kind of like potential with Sokka and Yue, whereas with Sookie, we've seen the development, how they went from kind of being a little bit antagonistic to each other. Sokka like admitting to Sookie that he needs to be thought by her, which is a big thing in episode 4. Her coming back, and obviously after what happened with Yue and Sokka being very protective, but her saying to him, "You don't need to protect me," and especially once they came back together and properly became a couple, you could really tell that even though they also kind of hadn't spent that much time together, that they really just suited each other. They're both warriors, and she helped train him, and through her later on accompanying him on his journey, she developed a little bit. I I ultimately think he would choose Sookie because Yue will always be important to Sokka, but the relationship with Sookie is so much more developed, and I suppose you know it's it really does come down to the development that like Sokka and Yue could have been like the strongest relationship in the show, but it didn't quite happen. Obviously, it ended before it really happened. Whereas Sokka and Suki is a well developed relationship that a lot of people really like, and I like it too. So, um, just because of like, I think Sokka would understand that like the potential of each relationship and where they went, and that his relationship with Suki is much more, I suppose, meaningful to him. Though Yue will always be important. I think that's probably the best way to answer this. So yeah, interesting question. But on to the next one. Yes, so this is just, it's not quite a question. It's just, I wanted to give my thoughts on this, and I don't think it's big enough news to really do a news video on. So, yes, Dark Horse did confirm on Twitter that they're keeping all of the core comic news back until San Diego Comic Con. Now, I think beyond just that, oh cool, we're gonna get news at San Diego Comic Con. Why are they keeping it so late? Why haven't we heard anything about it since then? That's, I think, the problem. Why did you announce it basically a year out at last year's San Diego Comic Con and are only going to properly talk about it here? For anyone unaware, there's been a lot of rumors going around that Brittany Williams, who was confirmed as the artist at New York Comic Con, is no longer working on the project, and that they're going to have to find another artist, which could potentially delay the book beyond its fall 2016 release date. Which, if it is coming out in fall, I think a lot of people were assuming early fall if Brittany Williams was still on the project, and that we'd have news before San Diego Comic Con. But now the fact that we're going to have to wait until June, July, I can't remember exactly when SDCC is, but that's a little late in terms of like, okay, we're probably going to get a preview pages and stuff like that, but we have to learn everything basically about this book. And to me, if they're announcing it at SDCC, it's like November, December, if not later, in terms of a release date, which is kind of pushing the fall 2016 release window that they've set up already. So it's a weird one in that I hope we're not going to be waiting a ton of time. I hope if there is a change of artist, as I said, the whole Brittany Williams thing is just a rumor right now. Nothing confirmed to fully say that she's off the book. It could just be her way of kind of getting a lot of attention off her and just letting her focus on working on the book without Avatar fans always coming up to her and saying, "Where's the progress on the book?" That this way she can basically go undercover without having to deal with a lot of that stuff. Um, The other thing is, of course, okay, you're going to announce this stuff at SDCC. What are they going to do? Is it just going to be part of a Dark Horse general panel, or is it going to be a panel to itself? I think with Korra Comics, North and South, the panel will take place before North and South, of course. SDCC takes place before North and South Part 1 comes out, so you'll have that to talk about. Smoke and Shadow hardcover is going to be recently coming up as well, along with the Korra poster collection. So you're going to have a ton of Avatar stuff to talk about, all Dark Horse products. I think you can realistically do an Avatar Dark Horse panel again and not be really rushing through things. You'll have a lot to cover because you're going to have to fully reveal the Korra comics. You can talk about that in depth. It's before the release of another Avatar comic. You can go into North and South in depth, and then the other things, of course, you can mention, and Q&As, and bring in some of the, make it a more general Avatar panel. Bring in some of the Korra Avatar voice actors. That's the sort of thing that would be pretty cool. Like imagine they get a preview for the Korra comics, just a couple of pages, and they bring in all the voice actors that are like in the comic pages, like Korra, Asami. You have like Janet Varney and Seychelle Gabrielle, and you have them basically act out the pages. I can see them potentially doing something like that if they are really going to go for this, I think. But yeah, let's move on to the next question. Okay, this is this is obviously the pretty big one. Um, ATLA or LOK, which is better and why? Which would I choose? Um, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is the more solid show, and I've been saying this for a while now that I think that's just very fair to say. Korra is excellent. Both shows are excellent. It is just that Avatar overall, over the course of its 3 seasons, its 61 episodes, are a bit more solidly put together than Korra's 52 episodes. The reason is because with Korra, there's arguably better ideas in terms of the villains. A lot of people would say the villains in Korra are better than the Avatar villains, Azula excluded. And I think for the most part that's true. The problem is that having each season of Korra be kind of its own story, you're really limiting the amount of time you have to tell that story. In that, like, 12 episodes for book 1, like, it just about works, but imagine what you could do with 20 to tell that story. Imagine 20 episodes for book 2 and the amount of depth they could have gone into with Wan's time, explaining Unalaq a whole lot more and stuff like that. Book 3 especially needed a bunch more episodes. Imagine they had a lot more time to delve into Lin and Sue, more flashback with Toph, really heavily develop all of those Red Lotus characters. Imagine you had time to delve into their backstories. Would have been amazing. Book 4, Kuvira, badly needed some fleshing out of her relationship with Sue, her turn from the character we saw in book 3 to the character we saw, obviously being the kind of ruler in book 4. Just Korra, just Mike and Brian had great ideas. They just didn't give themselves enough time to fully expand on everything. I think that's ultimately the key difference between the two series. Avatar doesn't resolve everything effectively, and there are some problems here and there, but for the most part, you never feel like anything is like rushed, or that like, oh, this arc needed a few more episodes. There's only like one or two things where you feel like, yeah, they probably should have they probably should have covered that and stuff like that. So, without going into like a whole video about this, I think that's the choice that like I have to make. Avatar is slightly more solid, but I think Korra, in terms of the really big moments, I think a lot of Korra's big moments are bigger than a lot of the big moments from Avatar. Stuff like Origin of the Avatar story, the book 2 finale, the plot in book 1 of how they link together Amon, Tarlok, and Yukon, that whole backstory is wonderful. Book 3, in terms of like the Return of the Airbender, is really great. And then the kind of very tragic book 3 finale, I think that was very well done. Then in book 4, you have Korra's arc, Korra's journey, her recovery in book 4. Great moments that I think are some of the best in the entire Avatar universe. It's just that a lot of the stuff in between those big moments isn't perhaps as good as the in-between moments in Avatar, and that's kind of the key point, I think, between the two series. So Avatar just by a little bit. Next question. Okay, Mei and Zuko will. Do you think Mei and Zuko got back together at the ending of Smoke and Shadow? No, I think that's basically just confirmed just by reading the end of part three. Zuko and Mei are not back together because the only thing that happens at the end with the romance is that Mei and Kalo break up, and that's all we see. I think it's part of the setup to Zuko and Mei getting back together, but I don't think that happens just yet. I'd be disappointed if we arrive into the next series and they're just back together, because I think we need to see and have the dialogue for the scene where Zuko and Mei get back together and address, the past, the fact that they did break up, and why that's changing now, why they are getting back together. We need to see that. That can't happen off screen for me. So, in terms of this direct question, Mei and Zuko aren't back together at the end of Smoke and Shadow, but I think more or less in one of the next few scenes that we see Mei and Zuko together in, whether that be the series after North and South or whatever, that will happen. And speaking of that, next question. I definitely think there will be another comic after North and South. Because there are so many points set up from Smoke and Shadow, they can't just leave it like that. That's not like a setup where like you can like come back to it in a few years' time. That is like North and South is happening next. That the return to Azula is happening after that. It's not confirmed just yet that there for sure is another comic because we never really get multiple ones announced in advance. But I'd be very shocked if we don't get another comic series announced. Just because I think there's definitely the implication that they kind of plan these comic series out in threes and not just like Smoke and Shadow part 1, 2, 3, but in terms of that, like initially when they did the comics, they planned the Promise, the Search, and the Rift all at the same time. And then there was a big break between the Rift and Smoke and Shadow. I think that big break was because they were planning out the next three comic series. So Smoke and Shadow, North and South, and then I think they're going to continue the naming convention, something and something, and that's going to be another kind of Zuko Azula, much more Azula focused story. I think to resolve a lot of that stuff, because I think you've set up something with Kalo, so I think you need to resolve that. This will be the book where finally Mei and Zuko get back together. I think potentially you probably have to make a really big move with Azula in terms of where you're ultimately planning to have her be, like whether that be redemption or what. So yeah, I'd be very shocked if there wasn't a comic series after North and South, an Avatar one. Um, but yeah, next question. Think they will change the endgame ships in Avatar series in the future ATLA and LOK comics? So yeah, this question is like obviously like Avatar: The Last Airbender. When you actually break it down, there are not that many endgame ships in terms of like the way the series ends and the ones that are still active in the comics. There is Aang Katara, which is confirmed. They're not going to do anything with that. We may see a little argument and then perhaps them make up. But for the most part, Katara and Aang is completely set in stone. That is a thing. Sokka, Sookie, they're still together in the comics right now, but they haven't spent a lot of time together recently, and we don't know for sure that that is the relationship. And then there's basically just Zuko and Mei, which I think they've been touching on it so much and hinting at it so much. It will be a thing, and they will get together at some point. That it to me, especially now that they're holding off any sort of reunion between Mei and Zuko until potentially another series, I cannot see them building this up so much and then just letting everyone down by having Zuko get together with someone else. They are building because they realize how important Mei and Zuko is as a relationship, and they will get back together at some point. Sokka Suki, I think, is the one that is potentially up in the air, just because we know so little about Sokka post the series. We don't know if he has any kids. We don't see any of his kids, and stuff like that. There's some people are saying that like, maybe Suyin's father is Sokka, but I'll get into that. Another one of the questions I think roughly hints at that, and they'll address that more clearly there. But Avatar, I don't think they'll mess with the endgame ships, and I don't have a problem with that because there are only three basically. Legend of Korra ships. Obviously, Tenzin Pema is set in stone. That's fine. They're not going to mess with that. Now that they've gone for Korra and Asami, that's the relationship. I don't think they're going to touch it. I just hope they develop it well enough that more of the fandom begins to really get behind that. Bolin and Opal. I think again because you had them so at odds with each other in like book 4, I think they probably will stick together at least for a while. It's hard to like say like too far into the future about like core characters just yet if they stay together and like have families with each other, but I think those two are close enough that it will probably be a final relationship, especially just because like Bolin has kind of had so many potential romances that I think Opal is kind of the character for Bolin, and they'll stick with that. Janor and Kai I kind of see as being our like ultimate airbender couple going forward that is going to like have one of the kind of strongest lines of kind of future airbenders in the future. So I think Janor and Kai will stick together. Absolutely, just as a way to, I suppose, like that will be the key line in terms of continuing on Aang's legacy, because Kai is a little bit like Aang, a little bit more kind of what's the best way to say this? A little bit more of like a rascal, I suppose, than Aang, but very similar to him. And then Janora obviously has such a great connection to like a lot of her other family members, so I think that's a key relationship. Mako, I hope they have an arc for him in the Korra comics, and I would like at some point for them to set up a solid relationship for him, and it just be super solid. That there's no problems. It's the perfect relationship for Mako, and just set it in stone. And I hope they go back to that kind of story idea they potentially had for book 4, where Izumi's daughter, the I suppose crown princess of the Fire Nation, and Mako became a thing. I'd really like that to be the case. As a way to return to the Fire Nation and give Mako something to do. I think that would be a really cool relationship to have. And that covers most of the main characters. I can't really off the top of my head remember any other relationships, but I think for the most part, the whole idea of this like question of like, should they keep all the end of series relationships together just because they're the end of series relationships? I think a lot of it depends on the build up. Like if characters have like argued before and had these moments where they've broken up and got back together, that's been their kind of like struggle, and they've got past that now, and the couple is kind of set. That in the grand scheme of things is like 3 or 4 relationships that happened all being the final relationship for that person. Is it really that bad of a thing? I don't really think so. Next question is what's your connection on Korra not being able to connect with past avatars, and what could be a way she could? So yeah, this is obviously one of the big things coming out of Korra. Korra can't connect with the past lives anymore because of what happened in book 2. She is basically the start of a new line of avatars, and she can't connect with the past ones. This is interesting. Like, I think they wanted to do something really big and have the focus be just on Korra. Korra can't rely on the past lives saving her anymore, because that's what happened at the end of book 1. They had this moment where she finally connected with the past avatars, and Aang helped her out of a really tough situation. They then reversed that in book 2 and had Korra basically deal with stuff completely on her own. Rava wasn't even part of her when she kind of finishes the fight in book 2. So that's cool. Now, why didn't they do anything to potentially get the past lives back and stuff like that? It's a sad moment, obviously, it happening. I think there probably is some sort of a way where she could get the past lives back. Somehow, whether it be using the Tree of Time or going into the spirit world and finding potentially the spirits of all the avatars again, kind of like Aang did in Escape from the Spirit World, that webcomic, if any of you guys have seen it. I think there is some form of a way for Korra to potentially get those past lives back, and have all that knowledge, all that history not just be lost Will they attempt to address that going forward? I'm not sure. But I would kind of like it to be a kind of side plot for Korra as like her life progresses, that she tries to somehow make amends for what happened and get some of the past lives back at the very least. Because it was a cool moment, obviously having to kind of the Avatar start again, but losing all those characters. Some of them we know, like Kyoshi, Yang Chen, Kuruk, and so on, Wan. But so many, like hundreds of avatars we don't know anything about. They're just gone. Like, well, you're never going to see them again. Like, I'd like some sort of a thing where whether maybe like Rava isn't able to kind of take the knowledge of all the past avatars back, but that Korra just knowing that like the knowledge of Aang is still out there somewhere, that like his spirit still remains in the spirit world, or his knowledge is still there in the Tree of Time whenever she needs it, or something like that. So I think there's probably some sort of an explanation for her to somehow be able to connect with the past lives, but maybe not in the same way as it has always been the case, where like they're just part of her again, but maybe they're separate, but they're still out there. Next question. Okay, this is an interesting one. Opinion on Zutara and Sokka Taka shippers who hate on the canon ships. Um, well, if you're talking about the specific people who just dislike the canon ships because they're canon and want these non-canon ships to be the case, it's not really a position I tend to understand all that much. Just because for me, I separate very clearly in terms of my own thoughts. My thoughts on the ships that are very clearly set up as canon ships, whether that be characters actually getting together or obvious hints from the show that two characters are like liking each other and stuff like that. They're the characters I ship and stuff like that. Whereas like Azutara, where for me in my viewing of Avatar and stuff like that, I don't see any sort of romance between them, so I don't ship them, and so I don't really tend to like understand why people ship Zutara. But I'll get into that in a moment. Taka, I think, is a slightly different story in that that is somewhat canon because at some point in the series, Toph did have a crush on Sokka. I think it was one-sided completely, and for the most part, Toph has gotten over it in that it really was just that one moment of Toph thinking Sokka had saved her and like kissing Sookie on the cheek and it being meant for Sokka, but then never really it being addressed again. Um, but again, because Sokka's, I suppose, if he ever got married or anyone who his ultimate relationship was with, Taka is still like a potential, I think. Taka is a valid ship. Zutara, on the other hand, though, is probably the most invalid ship in terms of being the most non-canon ship in the entire series because um, Katara and Aang is probably the most solid relationship in the entire show. And, mainly the only problem I ever have with shippers is when they really try to argue against, like in this case, this is probably the most prime example. People who try to argue that Zutara is canon is it's all about interpreting scenes in a certain way to make them romantic when for the most part they weren't meant as romantic. Whereas there's a million actual examples of like Aang and Katara relationship stuff that is in the show. And it's like I understand why you think Zuko and Katara could be a good relationship in terms of like Katara's personality, Zuko's personality, they might make a good couple. But the show never shows us what their relationship would be like. They never show Katara having a crush on Zuko, Zuko having a crush on Katara, that sort of thing. Anything with those two in the show is purely about them going from being enemies to being friends. And even then, that happens within the last 10 episodes. Within the last 10 episodes, Katara gives Zuko a death threat. So, like 2.5 seasons of the show, Katara hates Zuko. And there's no obvious connection that Zuko likes Katara. And then after that, it's basically just that Zuko proves himself to Katara and she trusts him after the betrayal of trust in book 2. I don't think there's anything romantic between Zuko and Katara. It's the only like it's the most kind of example of just like that sort of relationship where like I just don't get it. Like ship it all you want, but like I don't get it. And like especially if you're trying to argue it as canon, like I'm not gonna in any way like agree with you on that, but I'm also not gonna just hate on you for it. Talga obviously is a little bit different. Like I think at this point in time, what we know about Sokka, it's hard to argue that Toph and Sokka is the ultimate relationship going forward when he's still with Sookie, and nothing has kind of contradicted that just yet. And again, coming back to the thing I mentioned earlier on, Sokka and Su Yin, are they is Su Yin Sokka's daughter? Is that the other father for Toph's children? I don't think so. The reason I say that is because look at the lineage look at the family tree down that side of the family tree, Toph and that unknown character, and like who all the characters are. There is no waterbender at all in that family tree. There are a couple of non-benders, but for the most part, there are no like waterbenders at all in the tree. Now, it's not the best example of a way to just like dismiss this completely, but you know, in that case, it's Toph having the potential to give birth to an earthbender, and then if it was Sokka, the child would also have the potential to be a waterbender. Suyin ended up a metalbender, earthbender. She and Batar Senior had kids, and they all had uh, earth, and non-benders as well. Now that's a that's obviously a confusing situation because Su Yin being an earthbender can only pass on earthbending, and even if she has potential water tribe like ancestry, it wouldn't come across in any of her children. Um, Last question for this video. Okay, why do I think Sookie gets so much hate in the fandom? I don't really see a lot of Sookie hate in the fandom. I think at times she's an underrated character, an underappreciated character, but I don't think she gets hate. Every so often I see someone like calling her like a Mary Sue and like calling her out and stuff like that, but potentially it also relates to the whole Taka shippers stuff from earlier on. But the people that ship Sokka with someone else don't like Suki. But you know, I think it's one of those things where um, Suki as a very Sue. I don't agree with that. You know, she's not the character who has like super obvious crazy flaws or anything like that. But I don't think she's perfect. We've seen her lose a bunch of fights in the series. We've seen her have her own like little moments of kind of weakness and stuff like that. So I don't really have too much of a problem. I like her character. I really like her arc with Sokka, how she comes to join the group later on. I even like the idea that she becomes Zuko's bodyguard later on in the series. I just hope they transition her in the comics away from that a little bit now, and have her relationship with Sokka be further developed and that sort of thing. Just I think just in general, they need to fill out a lot of the ATLA characters' kind of family history, and just confirm to us if what Sokka's relationship is, confirm to us if Azumi's mother is May, and that sort of thing. So yeah. Yeah, that's been the video for this week. Again, in the comments, if you have any questions for next week's Avatar question video, definitely leave them below or on Tumblr, Airspeed Prime on Tumblr, Twitter, again, Airspeed Prime, or in the YouTube comments here. And I will answer basically every question that I feel I can actually give a proper answer to. There's one question here I skipped over because it would take too long to like just think of it off the top of my head, but I'll maybe get back to that next week. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.